Hail Internet, it's Paul, it's Matt, the Dork Lords. We are here talking about Lord of the Rings, the Rings of Power, Season 1, Episodes 1 and 2, A Shadow of the Past, and Adrift. We open with a flashback montage narrated by Galadriel, much like we see in the Fellowship of the Ring movie. We see her as a young girl. I'll talk more about that later. We meet her older brother, who may or may not be named in the show, but it's Finrod. Per the show, Finrod was hunting Sauron and was killed by him. It's not exactly the way it went down in the books, but Finrod had an awesome duel of incantations with Sauron, a la Sandman. He lost that duel, unfortunately, was imprisoned, and then was mortally wounded, killing a werewolf with his bare hands. So you could say Sauron was responsible for his death. Hence, revenge. So, Galadriel carries Finrod's dagger, another invention of the show. Fine. Morgoth, the big bad, was defeated at the end of the First Age. It's now the Second Age. Everyone thinks it's a time of peace, but they're wrong. And we end with Galadriel and Halbrand, the human castaway, adrift at sea. I named the title. So, drink. All right, anyway. They're rescued by a ship. We're doing spoilers here, but this has been in the trailer so much, I don't even think it's a spoiler anymore. It's the Numenorians. That's who shows up. That's who rescues them. Galadriel and Halbrand are headed to the island of Numenor in episode 3. Paul, before I ask you what you think of these episodes, let me just preface this by saying Paul is not a devotee of the books.
No.
Like myself. So this is he's going to have a viewpoint that is basically, I am just basing it on what I'm seeing on the screen.
Yes.
Yeah? Okay.
And whatever, investigations or things that I've heard to help me process what I've seen.
Fair enough. So Paul, given that background, what did you think of episodes 1 and 2?
I thought they were okay. Everybody has praised, and I think it is worthy of praise, the looks of it. They clearly put the money on the screen there. I like the cast well enough. Comparisons to Game of Thrones I don't think are unfair. We'll see how this show shakes out, but so far, Game of Thrones is more to my taste. I like the characters enough, so, I can keep watching. And certainly, R.R. Martin, I've at least read an interview where he names 3 people as strong influences on him in his writing. And one was Shakespeare, another one was Stan Lee, and the third was Tolkien.
Mr. Tolkien, yeah, of course. Yeah, there's a strong influence for sure there. All right, so I've already mentioned my disappointment in the story in my reaction video. The story is pretty fan fiction-y at this point. Of the 4 storylines, there's 4 storylines essentially right now. 2 of them don't really involve any familiar characters. There's the Nori Stranger plot and the Bronwyn Arondir plot. And so actually, in some ways, since those aren't really breaking canon, so they're like, in some ways, this story was gonna need to be fleshed out. It didn't have enough meat on the bones to go 50 episodes with only written material, which they may or may not have rights to, but that's its own issue. But so point being, there were gonna be characters that were gonna be made up for the show. Fine, so that's not really that surprising. And as far as those plots go, they're intriguing. I'm interested to see where they go. I think the best hope to provide us with a familiar central story from the book lore is the Celebrimbor Elrond Durin plotline. That plotline, which again, at the moment isn't really paying a lot of attention to the book, but I feel like it's headed in the direction of Sauron and some guys will deceive Celebrimbor. Celebrimbor's going to help. The rings are going to get forged. There's going to be a resulting war, and the Nazgul are going to come about because of those rings. So all that will be familiar territory, and I think this plot line is headed towards like, hey, and remember the books? So I feel like, all right, cool. The storyline that really worries me the most, because it involves canon characters, is the Galadriel plotline. It's maybe got more canon breaks than the rest of the three plotlines together. She never went to Numenor. Gil-galad didn't give her this, okay, you can head to Valinor. Like, all this stuff is like, a little loosey-goosey with the story. Let's put it that way. So that's the one that I'm a little worried about more than the others. But my hope for the show is that Celebrimbor takes us home, brings us back to something familiar to the book readers. So,
wait, okay, so help me out with my questions that other people who are familiar with this stuff probably won't have. But sorry,
sure,
this is my question.
No, that's right.
Who is Meteor Man?
No one knows, Paul.
Oh,
that
still?
is also not a canon thing.
One thing I heard was it could be
Gandalf,
because he had some other name at one point. Yeah, so they could call him another name and not call him Gandalf. Because he's early enough in his history where he could be called something else.
Sure. Yeah, okay. Well, I'll say this. Now that I've mentioned that I am disappointed with the lack of book lore in this thing, I'm just going to...
And everybody out there is like,
yay!
That.
I'm going to push that a little to the side, and we'll just kind of talk about the show on its own merits. How about that?
Okay.
So instead of like,
sure.
And then he didn't do this, and then he did... Like, okay, we got it. He didn't do the thing. Okay, so be it. So yes, The Stranger. Again, if you just go with the notion that canon's getting broken, because it is, I think smart money is probably on Gandalf. If you're doing a 2-bet parlay... I would probably add a Balrog, perhaps the Balrog, Durin's Bane. They're setting up this thing where the stranger has like these sinister connotations. Oh, the fireflies all died. Oh, like there's evil music and I can do all these kinds of powers. I think they're maybe throwing a little curveball and like, well, who knows? This guy could be bad. I would say that couple of things make me think that it's not like Sauron, for instance. Nori, the Harfoot, she has this whole thing about, hey, maybe I was meant to find this person. We have to look after these people, and I'm going to show this individual mercy, and we're gonna help them in a time of crisis. Tolkien isn't one to like punish people for that kind of impulse. It's not like,
oh yeah, I wouldn't think so.
Fool,
sucker.
So I kind of feel like this person will end up being like Nori will be rewarded for her act of kindness, is what I'm saying, and not like, great, right. you got me back on my feet, kill everything.
Yeah. Thank you for making this possible.
Exactly. So there's that. With Gandalf, there's also, again, he supposedly came in the Third Age, so he supposedly arrived thousands of years later. Again, we're just assuming we're fine with the canon getting a little screwy. He has a connection to Hobbits, Harfoots, and we'll say Hobbits. He has a connection to Hobbits in particular, and in the books, it's because of there was a really terrible winter where there was famine across the land, and he was in the Shire with the Hobbits, and he noted their ability, their capacity for mercy, their capacity to show concern and pity for their fellow creatures. And that really won him over. So here, they could be doing a version of that, essentially, where he's, oh, look, I'm with this group, and I note their capacity for mercy. Wow, that's awesome. So that kind of plays a little bit with the background of Gandalf. Gandalf is also associated with fire in a lot of ways. He has the ring of fire. There are several little fire elements about him.
And he was talking to the fireflies.
He's talking to the fireflies. He talks to the creatures. I'll say this. Another thing is one of the stranger speaks an elvish phrase. He says "mana ure." There's a couple of different ways to translate that, depending on how the phrase is accented and such. But one way you can interpret that phrase is "blessed fire." That kind of harkens to one of Gandalf's most famous lines. It's the line where he's standing on the bridge, Khazad-dûm, facing down the Balrog, and he says, "I am a servant of the secret fire, the wielder of the flame of Anor." You cannot pass. The dark fire will not avail you, Flame of Udun. Go back to the shadow. You cannot pass. But so the point being that he's a servant of the secret fire. So perhaps this is a sense of Gandalf's memory kicking in this moment. I found a quote from Unfinished Tales that I also think cuts in the direction that this could be Gandalf. It's a description. Now, again, the timing is all different. So be it. But it's a description of when these spirits, like Gandalf and Saruman, the Istari, came over. They made the choice to basically come over as the kind of these older men. They took a human form, but they also kind of had to relearn everything. And so the quote is, "For it is said indeed that being embodied, the Istari had need to learn much anew by slow experience. And though they knew whence they came, the memory of the blessed realm was to them a vision from afar off, for which, so long as they remained true to their mission, they yearned exceedingly." And so here you've got the stranger. It seems his memory is pretty gone, doesn't know how to talk, but he does remember like the constellation of the place where he comes from. There's something about the night sky. So he's having a memory of his time in Valinor, perhaps. And he's going to learn from slow experience through Nori and the Harfoots. So that's kind of where I think, again, I think smart money is probably on that this is eventually Gandalf. But if it's a Balrog, I win the internet because I predicted it might be a Balrog. I threw out a joke prediction back in like the second trailer that this might be the
I can't
thing.
imagine, though, that you would like that. So you'd be like, I'm right! That's the only thing I like!
That's right.
Take that, Nori! Ha ha!
Take that, Nori. So another question, because who is the meteor man, kind of the mystery box, is who is Halbrand? So Halbrand is this guy who's on the raft with Galadriel. That's a character that is not from the books. There's a rumor that Halbrand is in fact Sauron. And I didn't really want to believe it. And I still, I've been a little more convinced after seeing episodes 1 and 2 that perhaps he is.
Wow.
Although I feel like, I'm not rooting for him. Let's put it that way.
Man, so the person that Galadriel is chasing saved her.
Correct.
And so she's like, I want to kill this guy who killed my brother. Like, he.
Yep.
Does he know that he's saving the person that wants to kill him?
He almost certainly does.
Okay.
I think he would know who Galadriel is, and he certainly would remember her brother.
Because maybe he got hit in the head, and maybe, he's like, maybe I'm good.
Maybe I'm good. Well, okay, there is something in the books that say there was a period of time. So at the end of the first age, the War of Wrath happens. Morgoth captured. Sauron is to be held account as being Morgoth's lieutenant. And so he's like, you have to go back to Valinor to meet judgment. But they leave it to him to go back. Like they don't capture him and take him. They don't feel like they have the right to do that. So Sauron's like, sure, I'll go back and stand judgment. No worries. And then thinks better of it and doesn't. But you could make the argument that perhaps there was a moment in there where he actually did feel some kind of contrition and then was like, you know what, I think I'd rather avoid the punishment and I'll just stay here. So in the fine lines, you might be able to find a moment when Sauron actually wasn't some chaotic evil, must kill everybody guy. Although the Sauron we know is obviously that guy. So why am I more convinced after watching episodes 1 and 2 that Halbrand could be Sauron in disguise? One of the first lines he says when Galadriel comes aboard the raft is, looks can be deceiving. Now, he's talking about Galadriel and her ears, but you put that in the mouth of a guy and you're like,
sure,
interesting. It's also very convenient that Galadriel finds his raft and the rest of his companions are all killed by a sea monster, but he lives. Also note that when Galadriel jumps into the water, foregoing Aman, so she's She's headed to Aman, to Valinor, and then she makes this choice to, nope, I'm not going. I'm going back to Middle Earth. I'm going to swim back, which, by the way, that's a very long swim, but so be it. The thing that she remembers that makes her jump off the boat is her brother's advice, Finrod's advice when she was a little girl. And he says, sometimes we cannot know until we have touched the darkness. So she's asking, like, how do we know the difference between the light from the sky and the light in the water? And it's right after that, well, right after she swims a long way, but in terms of the show, the next experience she has is with Halbrand. And so I could make the case that he's saying until we've touched the darkness, until we've experienced that darkness, we can't really accept the light. So, now I put you with your sworn enemy, but you don't know it. So here's the thing where if he's not Sauron, I think maybe the direction that this is taking, and maybe there's a way to combine both interpretations. He's got this totem around his neck he's very protective of. I tried to zoom in on it. I'll zoom in on it here as well, but it looks like it's a jar with a little stopper on it. Could be, this is a kind of apart from the Sauron persona, it could be that that's like an herbal jar from Bronwyn, our human herbalist back in the Southlands.
Okay.
Remember, she is a single mom raising this kid. Halbrand is running away from something. Is it possible he was her love interest and he abandoned Bronwyn and their child? That Theo was supposedly his kid. Okay. He talks about being in the Southlands. He says, the orcs and the Southlands is where they're gathering. Somebody also put this evil black sword underneath his barn. Here's what I'm thinking. Maybe Halbrand is a real guy. He was in love with Bronwyn, had a kid. Maybe he's now possessed. In other words, instead of just being, it's Sauron with with a mask on, it's a real person, but the person has been possessed by Sauron. And so so maybe there's some bit of Halbrand in there somewhere. So that maybe, because he is going to return to the Southland, I believe, based on the trailers. Looks like he and Galadriel will go to the Southland. So there would be perhaps a reunion with Bronwyn. We'll see at that point, does she recognize him? She's like, I have never seen you before. Or she's like, oh, look, it's Halbrand. You abandoned us for some reason, being that you were possessed by Sauron and took off. I don't know. Anyway, so that's a theory.
I do think the whole, hey, we're going to make these rings that, you guys have heard about in the movies. That's interesting. I like the whole bit with, hey, let me see my friend for so long, and I'm so mad at you that I can't even let you, respect you. That was all fun. I liked that.
Yeah, I think that was the strongest part of the show, actually, was the Durin-Elrond relationship. And I liked, actually, playing it out, the idea of like, hey, I am mortal. I live for a couple hundred years. And for you to like ghost me for 20 years is a big deal. Maybe for an elf, it's like 20 years, who cares? But for somebody who's got a lifespan, they're like, hey.
I think, though, that I want some more help from you in understanding the other part of the first part of the story. So Galadriel was involved in this, she's this awesome warrior. And she was involved with, stopping this big problem. And so they're like, yay! All the other elves are like, you deserve something for that. And, here's she's like, no, this fight isn't over. We have to go get Sauron. And they're like, yeah, whatever. If you go after it, it'll make it happen or something, as they seem to say.
And they do seem to say that, yes.
Yeah. And so they're like, hey, we want you to do this thing. And so she says, okay, I'll do that thing. And it seems like she's going off to heaven? Is that what's going on? Do I understand that correctly?
Now, again, books versus show.
Well, I just want to understand the show.
For the show, I think you're right. I think what the show is trying to do is do a version, again, we'll take the canon that we don't have the rights to and we'll do a version of it. So, at the end of the First Age, again, there's this thing called the War of Wrath. Huge war, and it resulted in most of the continent being destroyed.
Wow.
Like that Linden, the area where the elves are all on the shoreline where the boats take off.
Sure. Yeah.
That was way inland in the First Age.
Okay.
Like the continent broke.
Oh,
and
okay.
Suddenly it was a coast. Hey, look,
okay.
it's our
Okay.
coastline. So it was a massive destructive conflict.
Okay.
And at the end of it, those elves who had come to the east, when they came to the east, they got exiled from Valinor. Aman is the continent. Aman is where, if you want to call it the angels, the Valar live. That's where they lived in kind of peace and harmony. They had their own reasons for coming to the east. It's kind of a long story. I'll explain a little bit of it here in a second. But when they came east, they were like, "Fine, you can never come back. You're exiled." Well, as a result of the war and winning it and capturing the source of evil, Morgoth, and imprisoning him, all of those elves were given a reprieve. You know what? You helped us out in this war. You can come back.
Okay.
And most of them did. Most of them were like, "Oh, yay, we're coming back." But Galadriel didn't. And so I have the little quote. I think it's from Unfinished Tales. This is where she refuses to go to the west. So it just says, "Pride still moved her when at the end of the Elder Days, after the final overthrow of Morgoth, she refused the pardon of the Valar for all who had fought against him and remained in Middle-earth." So she refuses the pardon, she stays, and hence it becomes like you refuse the pardon? Well, then we take it back. You can't come back ever then. It's not like you can just decide a couple of years later, like, "No, you know what? No. You can't do it." And so she is then banned until the events of the Lord of the Rings, when one of the things she does is she resists the temptation of the ring. So she's offered it, and she's like, "If I took it, I'd be a terrible person. I'm not taking it." And by passing that test, she is then allowed to go to the west, which she does. At the end of the Lord of the Rings, she eventually heads west, but that's thousands of years after this story. Anyway, so I think what this show did is they were like, okay, remember, she refused this invitation west once upon a time. We'll just put it into our context. And so in this one, she's like, "You can go to the west." And she bails. So that's how the show interpreted that.
Okay.
I'll say one thing also that probably wouldn't have been clear to someone who hadn't read the books. There's this moment when Celebrimbor and Elrond are talking, and Celebrimbor has this hammer. Elrond notes it. It's like, "Oh, that's the hammer of Feanor." Oh, all the things and he kind of goes off on some of the lore about it. The reason that Celebrimbor has that hammer, or would have that hammer, is that Feanor is his grandfather. Feanor is one of the most important characters in Tolkien's mythology, actually. But he's long dead by the time of this story. He's a villain, right? He's one of the most amazingly skilled elves ever. He created these Silmarils, the most powerful items in Tolkien's mythology. He's the most amazing craftsman of all time, but he also was a dick, basically. Okay. And he's the one that leads the elves against the wishes of the Valar east. He's like, "Come with me." He casts a big shadow over the events of the First Age, and here we have, I think it's appropriately so, the show is saying Celebrimbor, who's trying to be this amazing craftsman, going to try to create the rings of power, he is trying to live up to this craftsman, the greatest, most skilled elf of all time, my grandfather. I have the hammer he used to do all this really cool stuff, and I'm going to do my own version of that. And so that's kind of where that is, at least the implication of that.
That's cool.
That's good to me. I like that lore. That's
cool.
All
right.
I'm good with that. At the very end, too, we get the sense when the king, Durin III, is talking to the prince and he opens up the box, they kind of do a Pulp Fiction thing of like, "We have to keep this secret."
Yeah.
Almost certainly the thing they're keeping secret is mithril. So it's like it's true silver. It's a very valuable metal, and it's something that certainly the elves would like to use to craft with. And so it's like the only spot in Middle-earth where this particular precious resource is. whatever. It's vibranium.
Whatever. Okay.
They're Wakanda, and they've got the vibranium. And so they're trying to keep it secret because they think the elves are going to come and take it all from them. I'll throw this out as maybe a non-canon, but it would be kind of a fun direction to take. I just mentioned Feanor being Celebrimbor's grandfather and someone that Celebrimbor is looking up to. A cool way for maybe Sauron to manipulate Celebrimbor could be as some kind of like this, like a spirit version of his grandfather speaking to him. You know, like, it's Feanor, and he's telling me all these things. Oh, grandfather. But it's actually Sauron. That would be kind of a cool... In the books, it's a character named Anatar, and Anatar equals Sauron. But we haven't seen that develop yet. We'll just see if that ends up being a thing. All right, I'm going to quickly run through some Easter eggs, just because people seem to like that stuff.
Yeah, sure. People like eggs.
I mentioned a couple of things in my reaction video, so I'll just mention those again real fast as well. So, claw marks on the body of Finrod. Suggest he was killed by a werewolf, perhaps. Valasirka. It's very important. It's the constellation, the Big Dipper, is in Tolkien's mythology as the Valasirka. It was a constellation placed in the sky to give inspiration to the elves. Sure. And we see Galadriel looking up at the Big Dipper in one point. So that's pretty cool Easter egg there. That's cool. Yep. When she's standing in the Grove of Heroes, whatever you want to call it, there's like the statues carved in. Mm-hmm. One of those statues is of Luthien, the woman who's part of the Beren and Luthien story. It's one of the most famous of Tolkien's stories. And also the dog Huan, the Hound of Valinor, is there too. So there's a carving of the dog and Luthien, very important figures in the lore. There's another statue that I'm not 100% sure on this, but when I was checking out and trying to grab a statue of Luthien, I noticed, like, wait, one of the statues does not look elvish. The ears aren't pointed. The person is standing with arms rested on a helmet that looks to be of dwarven origin, and the helmet is on top of a sword. Right. I feel like that's got to be Turambar. There's so much legend about Turin. He is this amazing hero from the First Age. He wore the dragon helm of Dorloman, which was a dwarven helm.
Did he wear a shroud?
Yeah, that's right. The Shroud of Turin. He had it, and then he lost it.
Yeah, like some guy had some wounds on him. It's like, here, put this on him.
Put this on. And then it went into another mythology, and then it grew. But he also had Gurthang. It's the most powerful sword in Tolkien's mythology, which he used to commit suicide, and it broke. But anyway, so it's just kind of a cool, if that's actually him, it's a really interesting little nod. Interesting that he'd be in a grove of elven heroes. He was raised by the elves, whatever. And he killed Glaurung, the father dragon. So there's reason to put him in there, but just saying, I think there's a Turin statue in there. Pretty cool. Bronwyn gives Arondir some seeds, and I kind of had to go and listen and look it up. They're called Alfarin, which is an elvish word. I knew them as Simbomuna. It's a flower, it's a white flower that gets put onto the graves, the burial mounds of the kings of Rohan in the Lord of the Rings era stories. So that's a pretty nice Easter egg as well. This is a little bit of a reach, but opening scene, the little young elves running around, playing one of the kids is blindfolded, and they're like, yeah. Blindfolded kid is a redhead. Red hair, not unique, but it is very rare in the Noldor elves. I would say arguably the most famous redhead of that era would be Feanor's eldest son, Celebrimbor's uncle, Maedhros, who is maybe one of the most emotionally complex characters in Tolkien's lore. That guy's like, he does terrible things and awesome things, and it's like, oh God, this guy. But by the time of the story of Rings of Power, he has committed suicide by leaping into a volcano. So he's gone. But it's just interesting, like, was that a Maedhros reference? It would be pretty cool if it was. Clueless Fangirl, awesome YouTuber, actually noted this on Twitter, and I was like, of course, you're absolutely right. When Finrod is talking to young Galadriel,
yes,
And we just mentioned the fact that she's asking about the light of the sky versus the light that's reflected on the water, and how can you tell the difference? Well, in the Lord of the Rings, she gives a gift to Frodo, which is the File of Galadriel, which is I'll read the reference. This is from Fellowship of the Ring. In this file, she said, is caught the light of a Yarendil star, set amid the waters of my fountain. It will shine still brighter when the night is about you. May it be a light to you in dark places when all other lights go out. So it's literally light caught in water that she then hands off to Frodo. So that is a reference to an Easter egg to something to come later.
Okay.
Finrod, in that same chat with her, kind of foreshadows his own death. He's like, I'm not always going to be around to give you advice. You're an ageless elf. I don't know how you... But there is precedent for that much later. Obviously, again, this conversation is not recorded in the lore. But in the lore, there is a moment in the First Age where Galadriel goes to visit Finrod. During that visit, we get this line. Now, King Finrod had no wife, and Galadriel asked him why this should be. But foresight came upon Felagund as she spoke, and he said, An oath I too shall swear, and must be free to fulfill it, and go into darkness. Nor shall anything of my realm endure that a son should inherit. So he, just like, okay, you could just say you don't want to hang, you're not ready for marriage. You don't have to tell me, I'm going to die and my kingdom will be destroyed and why would I want a son? Like, oh, yeah. But anyway, point being, he actually has a bit of a prophecy of his own demise in the lore. And so it kind of makes sense. Again, they're doing a weird little connection to say, see, he did that. We're doing that. That's a thing. So that is connected. Those are the things.
Okay.
Those are the things.
Cool.
Anyway. Theories for episode 3. I've seen these trailers so many times, and now I'm like, I think I know exactly what happens in episode 3.
Oh, all right.
Although I know exactly what happens in all of the storylines, except the one that I mentioned is the most important one. So I'm like, okay. With the Elrond Durin one, I'm not exactly sure
good.
what we'll get in episode 3. But for the others, I think the stranger is going to slowly get his memory back, obviously.
Yeah.
And I think he's going to use his powers to save Nori and Poppy. There's a bit where he's like confronting some wolves at one point. We've seen the wolves are out and about, so we could do that. I think we're going to meet this season's kind of mid-level boss.
Okay.
Adar, who is an elf that's leading orcs, because Arondir's been captured. And in the trailers, we see that the captured Arondir, has been put into some kind of like a gladiatorial games, essentially, where they're having the prisoners square off against each other. And Adar is there to witness this. So I think this is where we're going to meet our villain of the moment. Again, not a character, theoretically anyway, it's not a character from the books. I had a theory on if you were to try to make a tie-in, but again, I don't know that they have the rights. Could be Maglor. I'll just throw that out there. Maedhros' younger brother. Okay. The second oldest son of Feanor. There you go. And then Galadriel, we're gonna be introduced to Numenor, which should be a huge thing. I mean, Numenor is this incredibly technologically advanced society compared to the rest of Middle-earth.
Which isn't saying much.
Right. No, they have computers and
and washing machines. Oh, good.
And washing machines and television. They're watching a show about themselves. They're like, oh, God,
wow.
Why am I here? What?
It's meta. So they were going to get a lot of looking at the camera and then breaking the fourth.
That's right.
Great. I can't wait.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Just like She-Hulk. Well, yeah. Anyway, we're going to meet Elendil and Isildur, who are very important characters for what's to come. Pharazôn, another very important character. So we're going to meet a lot of characters that, for the 50 hours of television, are going to be very important, probably in episode 3. Should I go into this or not? I'll go into this. I mentioned Harfoots versus Hobbits.
Sure.
And this question came up at Comic-Con. So the Comic-Con panel.
Yes.
And so one of the showrunners and writers J.D. Payne. Stephen Colbert asked him about, hey, why are there hobbits in the Second Age? Which, in the lore, really, they don't really show up until the Third Age.
Sure.
And so a lot of people are like, well, why the hell? Why are they showing up here? Why are they such a central part?
Yep.
Now, he could have given this quote from the prologue of the Fellowship of the Ring, so pretty good canon. The beginning of Hobbits lies far back in the elder days that are now lost and forgotten. Only the elves still preserve any records from that vanished time, and their traditions are concerned almost entirely with their own history, in which men appear seldom and hobbits are not mentioned at all. Yet, it is clear that hobbits had, in fact, lived quietly in Middle-earth for many long years before other folk became even aware of them. Mm-hmm. So, you could give that quote. I think you could say, hey, they probably were around in the Second Age. Nobody cared. Nobody noticed them.
Sure. They're small.
Right. He didn't say that. Instead, he did this, well, they aren't hobbits. They're Harfoots. Tolkien didn't say anything about Harfoots not doing anything special until the Third Age. Which is it's a kind of a smug, we found a loophole. Which, its face is kind of jerky, but it also doesn't make any sense because Harfoots are a subclass of Hobbit, right? There's Harfoots, Fellowhides, and Stoors. Yeah. So it would be the equivalent of saying, there's no birds in our show. We just have eagles. See, they're not birds. Okay. They're specific birds. We don't have hobbits. We have a specific type of hobbit. It's completely different. I don't know why you would blah blah blah. It's just it was a lame answer, frankly. You would think he would have expected that question and would have prepared for it because it felt like he wasn't prepared. That said, the series is here. It is a high production value series. I am interested to see where it's going, and as I say, I feel like if they can get me on familiar territory. And I think the Celebrimbor storyline is where it's going to happen. I will be pleased about it. At the moment, I'm kind of it's almost like they're willfully pushing the lore aside, and it's tough as a person who is versed in the book lore to get past that. But I'm willing to keep giving it a try. So
yeah, if I had to put money, I'd bet against it. But okay.
Fair enough. All right, Paul, Mr. Negative Nelly. Okay, but okay, fair enough.
No, the show's going to be the show, and
the show's going to be the show.
It'd be nice if it, adhered to what you were saying, and for you, your enjoyment has some connection to that. You're supposed to be a Lord of the Rings show, so why don't you make it like Lord of the Rings? So, and so we'll see what these guys do, and
it's very true to compare it again to House of the Dragon. I just bought the ebook of House of the Dragon, so I've been reading it. But I'm not invested in whether, that character's not from the book. I don't, so I could just enjoy it on its face. Pretty cool series. Wow, that's a cool dragon. Here I'm it's cool enough, but they didn't do the thing. So, I can't disassociate myself in the moment. But we'll see. So we've got Rings of Power. We're talking House of the Dragon, and we're talking She-Hulk. So come on back for all that. Thank you as always, Paul. Appreciate it, good sir. And we will talk to everybody next time.
Yes. Bye.